All right. Now, I'm going to go here.
Are you sure it's recording on that thing?
Yeah.
We need belts and suspenders. We had a podcast the other day, and we got to the end of it, and it recorded our voice, but not.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was awful. Okay.
Oh, gosh.
If you're ready.
Yeah, we're going to.
Okay, here we go.
All right, everybody, we're back. This is round 2, podcast number 15. I'm Drew Hassan, joined by
Daniel Anderson.
we have a spectacular lineup today. Matthew Thompson and Chad King, 2 old friends of mine. They're both attorneys here in town. So let me give my introductory spiel. We try to promote all things recovery around here. We have a number of endeavors that we're trying to support. We would love your support. So, like I always say, if K-Love and Wikipedia can have a begathon, so can we. You can make your donations to hashtag Daniel Hassan. We have a tax ID number for Recovery Lab. I just yet to go open the bank account. But we're getting there. Baby steps. So also comment, post anything that might be helpful to people in recovery. The general example I give is like where you can get Narcan. You can get Narcan for free at Mr. Moore's Bike Shop in Hattiesburg. You can get Narcan for free at the Pines in Columbus. And if you go to End It For Good, you can find them on Facebook. They have a whole lot of resources about the statewide distribution of free Narcan. There's fentanyl in everything, so we're not trying to die out here. I mean, you should get sober, but if you do mess up, you should at least have the Narcan with you.
Absolutely.
Not trying to die. So let me think if there's, we have, I'm confident, the most attractive hoodies you've ever seen for sale that say Recovery Lab. They're $35 for a large or extra large, $40 for a 2X. We only have a few left of the first run that we did. So message me on Facebook, or you can text me 601-297-3422. We would love to sell you one. I actually have them, or a bunch of them, in my car right now. But we do need everybody's support. If you can donate a little bit to our cause here, we're not without some de minimis overhead equipment. Our landlord is gracious enough to let me use this space for free right now. I told him to come. He wanted to be a fly on the wall. All right, anyway, without further ado, nobody wants to listen to me. Matthew, Chad, I can't thank y'all enough for taking your time to do this for me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And let me just say, so Drew and Matthew and I have been friends for, how long?
20 years.
20 years, yeah. And I just wanted to say, incredibly proud of you in your journey and where you're sitting today.
They've had a front row seat to my shenanigans.
It's incredible. And the hoodie is amazing. I saw it on Facebook.
Matthew told me one time, he said, you were stupid and now you have to pay the stupid tax. And I thought,
sounds like Matt.
I know it, and I've paid it.
Yeah, but it's incredible. That's a great testament.
Well, thank you.
You know,
Yes.
one of the things I always tell clients is judges love a comeback story. And just people in society in general love a comeback story.
Well, we can certainly stand for the proposition of coming back. Both been, Daniel and I we had shenanigans together.
Yes.
And,
Well, it's great that y'all are providing this platform with resources, because obviously we're the poorest state in the country, or one of. And what I find with people, especially in youth court and dealing with the state and the government, is that there are not a ton of resources that, number one, are available, but number two, that people know about. And so I think that's great with Christina Denton and at End It For Good and all of that. I think that's amazing to provide that information, because a lot of times people need the information so they have a chance.
well,
So,
do you know Angela Mallett?
I do,
She was the third person on the podcast. She's a fan. I mean,
great, yeah.
they do unbelievable work.
Yeah.
I've never met Christina, but she seems like she's got it going on.
Yes. So we've been fortunate to sort of work with her or go to some of her events. as it related to like parent defense and helping parents in youth court and helping them navigate CPS and things like that. So I really like her and her husband Thomas a whole bunch. So
Awesome.
The other great service is just letting people know they're not alone, because when you're in that position, you think you're the only one, and you think, or certainly think, that it's all on you, and you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you don't know where to go and where to turn to and how to take that first step towards recovery or towards just getting better.
Addiction promotes reclusivity and isolation, and when I was really the worst off, I had this cool house that I ordinarily would have liked, and when I look back on it, I think it's a goddamn prison. I would be holed up in there and crazy and high, and everything about it I associate with awful.
Wow.
And YANA, where they have the A meetings, stands for "You Are Not Alone" for a reason. Well, look, what do y'all do? What are y'all's jobs?
I'm an evil divorce attorney.
Evil divorce.
So Chad and I have worked together almost 20 years. I've been practicing law together for 7 years. We do family law, do big messy divorces, do child custody, contempts. We do appellate work, do a ton of adoptions because of Chad, do a ton of youth court because of Chad.
I was gonna say we're not just evil divorce attorneys, so we bust up families, but we also make new ones. So we're full service. So.
We also do some civil defense. So if you get sued, we can defend you even if it's not a family law case.
I didn't know that.
And we have 2 lawyers that do criminal defense. So we can help you pretty much regardless of what your need is.
If people decided they wanted to talk to y'all, how would they go about doing that? Do you have a web page, or are you on Facebook?
You can get us through every means.
We're on the interwebs.
Series of 2.
So we have a beautiful office in what is going to be described as downtown Madison once it has a downtown. 2060 Main Street. It's a beautiful Victorian home built in 1895. Redid it.
It's cool AF. I've been there.
It is.
Awesome.
So 2060 Main Street, 850-8000. We have a great phone number that's easy to remember. On the web, thompsonaddison.com. I have a blog, bowtielawyer.ms. That's my gimmick. I wear bow ties to court. Have one in the car in case of emergencies, too.
I even saw him tie one on Law Call one time.
That's right.
Sure did. Tied it live on air while answering the question in less than 30 seconds.
Wow, that's impressive.
If you're good, you're good.
That's right.
We're on all the social media, on the Facebook, on the Twitter, on the Instagram. Chad has an amazing food page on the Facebook.
Look, let us just throw this in there right now. How do you not weigh 500? I mean, for real. Like, you ought to see the things he posts on his Facebook page about what he's cooking, and it's like, 1, you're not fat, and 2, you didn't invite me.
Well, it's not. Some of it's really healthy, though.
None of it.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. A lot of it
He
is.
All
did
those
something.
cakes.
He did something with quinoa one time.
I did, and I ate it.
Not certain what that is, but
Marcus Bell, too.
Quinoa.
Quinoa.
No. So like Matthew was saying, we do a lot of family law with divorce and other things, and then in 2017 was when I sort of got put into like the parent defense program.
Okay, this is something that even I don't know anything about. So let's tell our listeners what the parent defense system is.
All right. So this,
It might be of some benefit. Isn't this what you need in youth court?
right? Yeah.
Right. So it is a common occurrence for youth court to be involved in people's lives that are either probably in active addiction, and certainly plays a part in their recovery.
Correct.
So for people that don't know, when little Johnny goes to school and has bruises, or little Susie tells a story about how mommy wouldn't wake up after she took some medicine or something, and then DHS or CPS gets involved, and then you find yourself in youth court.
Correct.
So
So anytime someone makes an allegation, and the majority of cases that come through, obviously the state of Mississippi, are more poverty related or drug use. So like the big bad, horrible sexual abuse, physical abuse cases, those are actually the minority. So what we find is that a lot of them come under neglect. And so that can be something simple as your lights were out and a neighbor knew your power was out, so they called the 1-800 number. And so what we found historically in Mississippi were that parents that found themselves in youth court did not have representation and did not have the resources available to get an attorney. And so, keep in mind, anytime we're dealing with youth court, there's only two possible ways out of youth court. You're either going to get your kids back or we're going to terminate your parental rights. I mean, that's it. There's only two options. And so we're dealing with a constitutionally protected fundamental right, a parent's right to have their child. And so obviously parents need representation. So the state of Mississippi put together a parent rep task force to put attorneys in sort of the most populated areas, obviously, that have court every day, because some counties may have court once a month. And so to sort of help make sure those parents were getting representation and that everything that's supposed to happen from a statutory guidelines to the state and federal policies. So CPS has federal mandates as well because we get federal money. So to get federal money,
get that money, you're going to
right,
be wrong.
yeah, unless it's embezzled. But if you're getting any of that federal money, there are requirements that you have to meet. Making sure that parents have the resources available. So when the government or CPS comes in and takes your kids, we're supposed to come up with a plan for you to get them back or to hopefully eliminate unnecessary removal. And so we saw a huge number of children that were being removed from parents' care, and there wasn't a lot of resources available. And so we found that one of those checks and balances was giving them an attorney.
Okay.
It just helped the process.
So if you're a listener out there and your kids have been taken and you either don't have an attorney or feel like you need one, how would people avail themselves of this system?
Well, first of all, when you get to the interesting thing is that the right to an attorney attaches not at the very beginning under the statutory scheme right now, because youth court's not a constitutional court in the state. It was statutorily created, so the legislators created it. And so that right to an attorney actually attaches at an adjudication phase. So when somebody first calls in the hotline number, it's assigned a threat level, depending on how bad the allegation is. And depending on that threat level determines when a worker has to go out, like within 24 hours, within 8 hours, whatever. And then they come on the scene and they sort of make an assessment right there. Like, do I need to call a judge and get these kids removed? Or are we okay leaving the kids here? It's a safety risk assessment right there. And so if they call and say, yeah, judge, we gotta remove these
This one's
kids,
bad.
It's bad. The judge can give a verbal order
Okay.
to remove the kids, and then CPS takes the kids, looks for a relative, first of all, and then second of all, we'll put them in a licensed foster home, and then we have to have a shelter hearing within 48 hours.
And I'll be a little bit cynical. To answer your question, how do you have one of these lawyers live in a county that's participating in the parent defender program?
Not every county participates?
No, and so just because it's not fully funded statewide yet. So what we found was we could put attorneys in the highly populated areas right now because they had the most removals, obviously, and the most allegations. And so to get those funds accessible we've been working with our contract with the public defender's office for the state. And so that's how we're trying to run some of this. But some counties, they also provide the funding too. And so if you're a small county that has court one day a month with a referee, because you don't have a county court, we don't have as much as much access to attorneys there. But we're working on that. It's just been a slow building process.
So just so everybody knows, there are circuit courts, chancery courts, and justice courts for every county. There are not county courts, which this might be getting a little bit in the weeds for everybody. There aren't county courts in every county. I don't even know I don't know why every county doesn't have a county court, but they don't. And not every county has a youth court, is that right?
So every county has a youth court. If you don't have a county court, your youth court runs through Chancery Court.
Okay.
So what they do is they just put a referee or designee that comes in.
Is that like a family master?
Yeah, like a family master, right? It's a
part-time
part-time,
judge.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, that comes in and handles that.
So around here, we've got Judge Broom in Rankin County.
Right.
And there's Judge, now doesn't Pearl have a youth?
No, Pearls was disbanded. That was the only municipality youth court that we had.
Okay.
What?
That's some constitutional issues.
Well, sure, yeah,
So to
but
speak.
it's gone. Yeah. And then, so around here we have Judge Broom in Rankin, we have Stacy O'Neill and Ed Hannon in Madison, and then we have Carlin Hicks in Hines.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. So throughout the state, you may have a referee if you're in a county that doesn't have a county court, or you may have a designated judge. Like we have, in Hines County, we have court 5 days a week. So it's just a difference of, we have a lot of allegations in Hines. It's the most populated county, and, lots of, if we have a child that somebody gives birth to a child and the child tests positive or the mom tests positive, whatever. And so that sort of started in 2017. And then one of the very first cases I ever got, the judge in Hines County called me, it wasn't Carlin, and said, "Hey, I've got this mom that's trying to navigate the system herself. She's filed her own motions. I need you to help her." So I called her, and she told me this horrific story that they had come into youth court for a sexual abuse allegation, a child on child. And when we got there, CPS was like, "Man, this is nothing. We're just going to close out the case." But back then, they drug tested every single person that walked into court. Didn't matter what the allegation was. So she tested positive for marijuana. They took all 4 of her kids. And she had been fighting over 4 years to get them back. And that was the very first case I got. And I thought, this can't be true. I mean, this is just crazy. No, it was true. And so that was happening all over the state. This woman is not the exception. This happened a lot. And so what we did was we started working with legislators and changing the law to where
If I didn't know you, I don't know if I would believe this story.
I know. I said the same thing. I was like, there's no way this is true. But it was 100% accurate.
What's got to be aggravating is the hit or miss nature of how these rules are enforced.
Correct.
When I first started, I had a case, and he had smoked marijuana in front of the child, and I represented the mother, and I thought, man, I got this in the bag.
Right.
I'm fixing to get custody modified. Life is good. And I was in front of Judge Owens, and she was like, well, Mr. Hassan, is there any proof that was he selling drugs? Well, no, Your Honor, but you heard him admit that he smoked it. He was doing the marijuana, hippie lettuce, and she said, well, did he sell it in front of the child? No, Your Honor. Did he smoke in front of the child? Well, he smoked it after she went to bed, and she was like, that ain't good enough. And I thought,
If you were one county
if
over.
I was in Rankin County,
One county east.
yeah,
Right. I mean, it is crazy, but what happens with youth court is because youth court's a confidential court, right? So they have all these confidentiality laws or whatever. So, they're told you can't tell anybody about this. You could go to jail if you disclose any of this. So, these are parents that are coming in that are being told, you've got to go take a drug test right now. Now, the state may already have their kids, so they're like, oh, I got to do what I'm told. They have no attorney there going, wait a minute, this isn't a drug case. You're not drug testing my client. So it was all just sort of set up against the parents. And so that was the first case. So what we did was we worked with legislators who were awesome, and we got the law changed to where youth court can't take probable cause based on a positive drug screen for marijuana alone. That's not enough to take someone's child. And then we expanded that, obviously, to start covering other things that just, there had to be we wanted a causal connection.
Sure.
So if you're saying somebody did drugs, show me the effect that's had on the child.
Yeah, for those of you listening at home, this isn't a free-for-all to go smoke drugs and take your child somewhere. You have to show harm to the child, and the mere fact that you used a drug at some point in the past but would still fail a drug test for it doesn't mean you harmed your child. It doesn't mean
it's really no different from drinking. I mean,
100%. But we know the effects of that on children. We've known those studies for decades and decades of children that grow up in an alcoholic household, things that happen to them afterwards, and problems they have in the future. And so, absolutely. I mean, nobody's tested them for alcohol. Mm-mm. But most of the youth courts have stopped that practice of just railroading parents into when they walk in the door, you got to take a test.
It literally, as soon as you walked in the door,
Right.
you hung a left and went and your analysis test immediately.
Yeah.
And they would test grandma who was coming in there because mom and dad's a train wreck, temporarily, and she's just trying to do the right thing.
Right.
She's not even fighting for custody. Walk in the door.
Moral support.
Right. Well, that's the thing. What's interesting about youth court is that it is confidential, so you don't get to have your family members in there. They don't even let them go in the courtroom. So you may want to bring some moral support, and unless you've got a judge that's like, oh, are we looking at this person for a possible placement? I may let them in. I may not. They don't have to. So you really are sort of alone on this island when you're stuck in a youth
With no
court somewhere.
lawyer.
Yeah, with no lawyer. And so that's what was really harmful because, our courts historically have treated, obviously they say the fundamental right to be a parent is one of the most precious rights, even above any property right. And then they equate the TPR, termination of parental rights, as the death penalty. But no one treats it like the death penalty.
Right.
That's been one of my biggest arguments. It's like, wait a minute, why aren't we? And once that case starts, like I said, we only have 2 ways to end it. And so that attachment of an attorney advising someone should start immediately because everything that they say can be used against them, especially if there's a criminal element to it. So it's pretty scary, actually.
And then the frustrating thing in practice is even though the statute says shall, our appellate courts find excuses to get around it.
Right.
And so even though it says shall be appointed a lawyer, and it says when you're supposed to be told, they find excuses for when that procedure is not followed, and then that parent's rights are terminated, and they say,
Right.
Shall is the verb of obligation. There's no getting around it. Shall means it must be done.
It's a mandate.
No exceptions. Unless there are exceptions.
Unless there are exceptions.
Unless there are.
So one of the things that I did with the public defender's office, or I'm still doing, is I help with appeals. And normally that is a termination of parental rights appeal. That's somebody that already lost their parental rights to their child. And what we found is in cases where parents didn't have an attorney, even though there were all these mistakes made, by the time we get the appeal back, the court says, well, she didn't raise those objections then. And it's like, are you kidding? This is a parent without an attorney navigating a confidential court system. and we're dealing with a TPR. And
So they're
it's forever.
using the not.
Correct.
she didn't make a timely objection to
Yeah.
hearsay, Your Honor, in violations of the Daubert standard.
Right. So it really is sort of a it was this morning on CBS this morning did a great thing on CPS nationwide with 2 mothers in this exact same situation that had lost their children. One was terminated, one was not. But she tried to appeal it. Same thing. It was affirmed because it went through all the steps for their youth court. So it really is a systemic problem. I think when we talk about CPS and when we talk about whatever, it's a little overwhelming in the sense that nobody knows where to start, so they don't start at all. So real reform never really happens. But, people's lives are being completely transformed, and the only great thing that we've had recently that came out of something horrible were all the children separated at the borders. Because what we got was actual case law now, federal case law, and the Academy of American Pediatrics that said when you remove a child from their parents, that is trauma that's inflicted on a child that can last throughout their whole life. They're more likely to have a drug addiction. They're more likely to have an alcohol addiction. They're more likely to find themselves in the criminal system. And so this is tried and true research that we have from doctors and scientists that have looked at it now. Now we have that. When before we didn't, because there's not a bunch of case law at a youth court. So it's been very interesting.
I bet you the people that get their kids taken the most don't have the money to appeal it. And then
No, they don't. I mean, historically it is. It is indigency. And, poverty does not equal neglect. I don't know very many people that wake up and say, I would like to be poor today and live in this crappy place and not be able to pay my bills or provide for my kids. And so that's why it's so important that the resources that we have was being used appropriately to help people. And, and it wasn't. And I don't know that it still is. So, sorry.
sad.
It is horrible. It really is horrible. I know it's sad and it's gloom and doom, but I mean, when we're talking about somebody's children, I mean, it can be over. And then what they do is they put these unrealistic expectations on people. So they'll say, you want your kids back? Here's the hoops you need to jump through. Stable housing, stable employment, mental health assessment. I mean, it's sort of just like a checklist, and it's like, well, if that
literally every facet of your life in the next 30 days.
But if that was so easy to do, you would have already done it. You know, if you need more help than that, or it'll be, I want you to do drug treatment, go to this, you know, how can you pay for it?
And being subjected
right.
to random drug tests that are $100 to $300.
That's right. And if you don't do it within 24 hours, then that's an automatic fail. And it's like, well, you know, they can't just take off, you know, a lot of parents, they can't just take off work at the drop of a hat. Or if they do, that means the difference in being able to pay their light bill that month. And then we're back in the same situation. And then we say, we'll take your kids from you. We'll take your kids from you, and we won't help you pay your light bill, but we'll give your kids to this foster family and give them $1,000 a month to pay for the child.
That's not an exaggeration.
It's not an exaggeration. That is how the system is set up.
All right. Where would you start? You've got a magic wand. You can begin remedying one of these areas. What if you got to control what the legislature did, what would you tell them to do?
Well, what would I do first? I would lift confidentiality. That's an easy step, and what it does is it increases accountability. It just does.
The sunlight of transparency. They're going to be slower to pull the trigger on a TPR. They're going to take more reasonable steps if they know they're getting looked at, or at least the potential for getting looked at.
I won't say what his name is because he's still on the bench, but I've heard a sitting chancellor describe youth court as Nazi Germany, and he said it's exactly what it's like.
I mean, some can feel that way. They're not. It's not all bad. It's not all doom and gloom. There's some people trying to do the right things, but transparency would go a long way. The interesting thing, the confidentiality is under the guise of protecting children, which is the opposite.
How would you balance it? How do you have transparency and also protect the children that have been abused?
But you're not protecting children. So the example I always give is if there's this horrific sexual abuse case, say a child's been raped or something horrible that people just have a visceral response to protect this kid or whatever. There's also a criminal trial. That criminal trial is not confidential. It's not sealed. And the accuser has the right to face, you know, like the defendant has the right to face his accuser. And a lot of times children do testify in those criminal trials. So I think that's sort of just like a real good feel good, like, hey, let's protect kids. I mean, like that's the reason why it's called child protective services or child welfare. You use all these positive words that make you feel good about what you're doing.
And in that criminal case, you can get all of the youth court records and use them. There is a blanket exception if there is a criminal case that's pending that relates to a youth court allegation. It's bizarre.
That is bizarre.
It goes to it inures to the benefit of the accused, of the defendant in that criminal case.
Let me tell you something else too in Mississippi. So in Mississippi, there's a program called My Kids, Mississippi Youth Court Information Delivery System, that's only available to the prosecutor, the court staff, and CPS. So you as an attorney would not be allowed to look at that court file. Can you imagine that? Like you're defending a parent, but they're going to tell you you can't have access to that? That is insane.
Look, Ernie had a client who had a youth court matter in Hinds County. And that was the first time, and this was maybe 9 months, a year ago. And this is the first time I'd ever heard of My Kids.
Right.
And this lady comes to Ernie and she's got this sob story, and so we file a motion to get the records from youth court. And they send over unsigned orders.
Right.
And so Ernie's looking at it and he says, where are the signed ones? There weren't any.
That's right.
It's because everything in that court system is generated or populated by this closed information delivery system. And so it's very difficult even for attorneys to navigate. I can't imagine just a parent on their own. I mean, like, it really is set up, and I get it. They did it to improve efficiency or to make sure that we were checking the boxes for the federal requirements to make sure our money kept coming, all of that stuff. But it really has become a court that is more form over function because they just rely on this little delivery information system to do everything.
And the form over function even goes so far as to say who was at a hearing and who participated. We've had cases where it said the guardian ad litem was present, where we know for a fact the guardian ad litem was not present, never spoke to the child, never spoke to either parent, and then at the next hearing made recommendations.
Right. But by the time you get to an appeals court, this is why it matters, because by the time you get there, the court is going to give full faith and credit to whatever order was entered. So if that order says we found A, B, C, D, even though if you look at the transcript they didn't, the court's going to take the order for its value there. So it really is sort of set up. It's hard for parents. I mean, I try not to be so gloom and doom, but it is very, very scary once you find yourself in a youth court, especially without an attorney. And there's not a ton of attorneys that practice in youth court. There's just not.
This is all very, I mean, it's very interesting to me. I'm just enjoying being a part of the conversation right now. I have very little to add right now, but we'll get to, if there's something that I can chime in on, I certainly will.
So I do want to talk about a couple of things that I do love. So there is, and I know you're talking about resources and stuff too, but I do love Born Free. So when I have a mom that gives birth to a child that either she tested positive or the child tested positive, if we can get her into Born Free, that allows her to keep her baby with her and go through the treatment. I think that is huge for bonding time. Now, of course, just like every other place, resources are limited, places are limited.
Tell people what Born Free is.
So they help with recovery, but they are set up in a way where you can bring your newborn with you or your baby with you. I think they take up to a 3-year-old. Now, there's just not a lot of places that are like that, where you could still bond with your child, do whatever you need to do, and have that assistance there. And you're there with other mothers that also have children. So that's just a unique place that you don't find everywhere, which I think is great.
I only know of that one. I don't know of any other ones.
Well, I know at one point
there may be some in the faith-based world.
Yes, yeah, and I know there's some exceptions that could be made for some other places, like depending on the child's age, that they may let you come, and depending on how long you're going to be there or whatever. But if it's somebody that they're like, hey, the waiting list is so long. You're going to have to just find your own. There's not a ton of people don't have the money to just go pay to, even intensive outpatient is very expensive, but inpatient, there's just not a ton of resources. And so you feel like you're sort of stuck behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, I would like to plug Oxford House though for this. Mm-hmm. Oxford House does allow women to have their children there.
Right.
I mean, maybe not in every lady's Oxford House, but by and large, if you want to, get into sober living women, you can have your kid there with you.
Right. Which is huge for bonding purposes. So what we had found was one of the reasons why we made this law change, especially as it related to newborns, is we would find that a mom would come in to like UMC, have a baby. They would maybe do a urinalysis there, everything was negative, and then the mom would go home. And then 2 weeks later, the meconium test, which is the child's first stool sample test, would come back and it might be positive for marijuana or something that she could have ingested before she even knew she was pregnant, because that can go back to the last week of the first trimester, So then all of a sudden CPS would show up at her house and take the child out of the nursery, even though they've been at home together and doing fine for weeks. Mm-hmm. They may show up later and we were like, whoa, what are we doing here? And so that was the other thing. We didn't want probable cause based solely upon a newborn's test either. We had to show some type of neglect that was ongoing, because that is a real scenario that was happening. So
not merely to be devil's advocate here.
Please.
What if, how would they know that the child wasn't neglected if somebody didn't go by there and just kind of, hey, how's everything going?
Missing the healthy baby checkups.
Right.
Showing that the child isn't gaining weight.
Right.
There's already checks and balances for a newborn.
How would they know for anybody else? I mean, so that's one of the things I always say. There's a checklist that CPS has to determine whether or not your house is safe, suitable, and appropriate. And so I would always say, well, who did you go to Drew's house? Did you go to Daniel's house? Did you see if they have a fire extinguisher? You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, just because there's an allegation doesn't mean that like this whole family is opened up to every subjective thing you want to do. That's what bothered me about it. I thought, if you want it to be a blanket statement, if you want to go around and like one of their rules was like if you have a child over 7, they couldn't share a bedroom with another child that was the opposite sex. Are you kidding? I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Like, I have 3 sisters. Me and my sister have bunk beds way past 7. And I thought to myself, are you going around and knocking at everybody else's house and saying, how many kids you have? What are their ages? Where are they sleeping? Give me a break. I mean, I just think it's a little bit of an overreach.
What if you have mixed-sex kids in a 2-bedroom house?
Right, yeah.
What you gonna do?
You better have a fire extinguisher.
Right. You better hope nobody makes an allegation.
Like, honestly, what
Right.
would you do?
Right.
I can provide a loving home
That's right.
with bunk beds.
Yeah. Look, and let me just give some credit to some of our really we've got some youth court judges now that have been parent defenders or been prosecutors, and they get it. And that's the best thing that could ever happen for reform, because now it's not just, oh yeah, grab those kids, grab that, let's remove them. It's like, no, y'all help them. If they need a bigger house, let's help them get a bigger house. What are you doing? How is the agency helping them? Not just telling them what they need to do, but actually making a reasonable effort to help. And it has made a huge difference in Hinds County. Our removal rate has dropped significantly. We've got children not in foster care, or we're getting them with relatives, which is so much better for a child than going to a stranger's home.
Right.
And that is what a foster family is. It is a complete stranger to this child. And so it really has reduced that trauma.
And then the knock on foster
No.
parents, because they have a role and they're fantastic and it's a blessing. But if it's really limited resources, rerouting foster parent money to that parent so they can pay the light bill is better for that child.
Right.
And foster homes should be a last resort. The government taking anyone's child should be a last resort. And that's how it's written in the statute. We should make every available effort to not have to remove the child or to
But it
leave
gets
this child
filtered through
home.
the lens of reefer madness. And,
Right.
Sure.
Right. That's true. Yeah. But hopefully there is some reform coming. I mean, there's still a big push. There's a push nationwide. Now that, it's sort of coming out of the shadows. And we are in the minority of states that still have confidential youth courts. A lot of states have opened their courts up. Yes. Because they found that had more accountability. I mean, if attorneys could go sit in and watch an adjudication, just like you can sit in a criminal trial or sit in a divorce trial, they tend to practice there more. They seem to know what to expect. There is that accountability.
And look, the nasty custody cases, which may not be sealed, are just as bad as anything that's happening in youth court.
Oh, right.
Just because it's in divorce court, it's not all of a sudden different conduct.
Good point.
Yeah.
And the judges, they are very reluctant to seal a chancery court child custody case. There has to be really good reasons. Allegations of just heinous conduct, abuse on the child. Otherwise, they're not sealing cases. And our Supreme Court, interestingly, has sua sponte, unsealed chancery court
That
cases.
means of their own volition.
It's not a Harry Potter spell.
It felt like a Harry Potter.
It does.
Because everybody agreed to seal this file, and the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to unseal that.
Insufficient.
Right. So that's sort of like the youth court world, but like when we have somebody that needs help with recovery or whatever, we are trying to find resources always to help with that. And so they will have random drug tests, preferably by a clinic, not just, a bailiff at a courthouse, which is what we want. But obviously,
is it your story? Or
it's my story. I was there one day for youth court in this really old courthouse, and this was a drug case. So they had drug tested my client. And I'm like looking through the courtroom, and there's like some bailiffs literally holding up like a cup of urine at a window. And they're going, is that positive to you? Does that look positive to you? And I thought, oh God, this is awful. Like, these are not people that are qualified to even read a drug test.
Look,
this is not lab certified. What are we doing here?
We had, this happened at Oxford House one time when I lived there. We ordered a whole lot of single-use
Right.
urinalysis cups. And people were failing, testing positive for things that they had not done.
Right.
And it was causing a problem, as you can imagine. And I thought, y'all are going to get people in real hot water.
Yes.
Because let me tell you what would happen if I failed a drug test at Oxford House. My parents weren't going to hear it. They were like, we're done with you. You've had 1, 2, 3
Right.
to the 10th power chances. We know you're lying. And they're not going to hear, oh, it's a faulty drug screen.
Right.
I mean, that's going to fall on deaf ears. And if you're reporting to some oversight committee or oversight commission, like you're on parole or probation or whatever, they ain't having it.
Right. And that happened. I mean, like, that's the thing. That does happen. I remember at one point in Hines, we had a slew of children, like 7 to 10, that I don't know why they were drug testing them, but they all came back positive for cocaine. And it was all in the same little clinic. And I was like, there's no way all these kids are getting together and doing a line. Like something is wrong with your test. But, like when you've had a problem with addiction, nobody believes you.
Absolutely.
Because you hear all the whatever. I had a hair follicle come back positive for meth, and the guy slurping down, it was his Afro nose spray, and, like everything, which I know. So you automatically have this skepticism if you have an active problem or you've had an addiction, that they're not going to believe you anyway. And it's legit. Like, sometimes they are wrong.
Look, we had people test positive for benzos at the house that I lived in, and I was fixing to have to kick out one of my best friends. And I got on the phone with some other guys in higher up the chain in Oxford, and they're like, well, we had this problem before. I reached out to the company, and they told us that sometimes. And I was like,
that can ruin a life.
Y'all are
Absolutely.
ruin somebody's life.
That's
That's
right.
how we threw out all the drug tests.
Oh, good.
I mean,
no, it does happen.
There's an app out there called SoberLink, and you plug it into your phone and you blow into it, and it'll tell you.
An app? How do you blow into an app?
It has a device.
Oh, it has a device that plugs in.
An
Sorry.
app on the phone.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Steve Jobs.
I'm sorry. I was just listening to what you said.
And you plug it in the bottom of your phone and you blow into this, and it tells breath, alcohol, whatever. And then it also verifies that you're you by facial recognition.
Oh, wow.
So that you don't give it to your sober buddy to go blow into this thing. But the problem is, it's not great. And so I had a situation where the guy's a great big burly guy with a big burly beard, and he blew into it, and it said a failed test because it didn't recognize him.
Oh.
And the other side made this huge deal about it, that he failed an alcohol test. Now, it was when he was returning the child, and the child was fine. And the crazy thing, or the most frustrating thing is, the mom saw him take the test. He did it in the truck right after he dropped the child off. And the lawyer knew it, and they both gamed the system to say that he failed this test. And false positives happen regardless of how good your technology is.
Right. Absolutely. And that's
that's a shady lawyer.
right.
I mean, that's a knowing misrepresentation. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It felt that way.
Because it is that way.
That's how it felt.
Well, so it's interesting because if drug use or alcohol, whatever, comes up in youth court, the only sort of advantage to Chancery Court is that it's a much quicker time frame. So that's the other thing about Chancery Court. So if you have a case with divorce, custody, whatever, and drug use is a problem or whatever, you just have a harder time getting back in front of that chancellor. As opposed to in youth court, we have certain timelines. We got to have that adjudication within 30 days or within 90 days, whether or not we took a child into custody. And so we should stick to those timelines. That's the only thing. It could take forever in Chancery Court to get back. And sometimes that's just how it is. It'll be months and months.
We even saw a few instances where the Chancery Court would put in safeguards on the parent who had the substance abuse issue, on their access to the children. One included no contact. And so they did all the right things, sober and counseling and whatever, and then the other parent tried to terminate their rights because they didn't contact the child for the prescribed time.
Did that work?
It kind of worked at first. It got reversed on appeal.
The chancellor bought it? I mean,
I feel like they overlooked it. I mean, I think it got missed in the brouhaha that there was a no contact order and that they were abiding by it.
Right. Or if you can have contact, so like in the youth court world, if you can have visitation, it's 1 hour every 2 weeks, which equates to 24 hours in a year. I mean, like, that's what you get.
And it's like a sterile environment.
It's at the agency. Like, you
fluorescent
come up there,
lights,
right.
A fake plant in the corner, magazines that are older than the child.
Right. Air conditioners that don't work. But if you get to that point, like say the state wants to TPR or terminate your parental rights down the road, the first thing they always argue is that you failed to maintain reasonable visitation, or that there's a deep-seated antipathy and a substantial erosion of the parent-child relationship after we've only allowed you 24 hours in the whole year to see your kid. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, what? But yeah, that's exactly what happens.
I need y'all to tell me some good stories. Y'all are making me depressed.
Oh no. I know. Well, it's
Tell
the season.
Tell us a success story.
Well, that lady that I talked about at the very beginning got her kids back.
Amen.
So that is a huge success story. They quit drug testing everybody that walked in the door at Hines County. That's a huge success story. And the removal rate went down significantly. And we do have more and more attorneys. So one of the things that I get to do with the public defender's office is we have to certify parent defenders. So if you're an attorney and you want to work in youth court and take more than 5 cases in a county, you have to be certified by the state. So Matthew and I, we speak a lot at the trainings and to certify, and they seem to grow. Like there's more and more attorneys that are interested in this type of work. And then we've got some great new people at CPS that are really working hard to sort of change the system and help correct some things. So there are some positives. But, you know, I always like to talk about those cases because everybody, it's a confidential system anyway, but not everybody knows how that works. You know, like everybody just has this idea that, you know, oh, we are protecting kids. And that sort of response immediately is like, take those kids out of that home and put them in this better home. And so I always try to say that's not the general rule of what comes in youth court. And people aren't beating their kids every day, and that's what we see every day, or raping kids. I mean, it's just not that.
And the positive is youth court's goal is reunification.
Right.
I mean, that is literally and legally the #1 goal is reunification of the family.
Right. It's to give them the help that they need to make sure that we can say this child's safe staying in this home, and to help them do that. Actively help, not just tell them what they need.
Well, I can certainly relate more to the parent that's got the drug problem. Mm-hmm. And I can say that, you know, layers, I mean, I've been sober for longer than 5 years, and I renewed my contract with LJAP, that's the Lawyers and Judges Assistance Program. Mm-hmm. And I have to, you know, log in every day. And do I have to go take a drug test?
Okay.
And, you know, layers of accountability help. Right. And the more of those things that can be offered through the youth court to that accused parent, the better. Right. I mean, I hate it that, I mean, there have been times where if the mother of my children was doing the same things that I was doing, then my kids would have been taken from
right.
I mean,
right.
And should have.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, I would like to say that, you know, I would have, if I ended up in youth court. I mean, fortunately, I didn't ever have my kids around me really when I was doing the most shenanigans.
Right.
But if I did find myself in youth court, I mean, I would like to think that I would have straightened up out of fear of losing them.
Right.
But there were times where I don't know if I would have made those choices. It hurts my heart really that it's get sober and do right or suffer TPR. I mean, that's
correct.
To the law, that means you're no longer that child's parent.
Right. Forever. You can't come back.
No rights to them, can't force visitation, phone calls, nothing.
Right. But, you know, the thing that I find, so what I like about that is that even when you may have been at your worst in that dump of a house or whatever you were talking about, your kids loved you and wanted to see you. And imagine if you only got to see them 1 hour every 2 weeks. It's like, to me, like if somebody's actively trying to fight addiction and they're looking for a reason to stop, having something so limited or making it feel like you shouldn't have contact with your kids, or it like takes away their hope almost. You see what I'm saying? It's sort of counterproductive. But they're like, well, what the hell does it matter?
You need stick and carrot.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So I get it has to be a balance, but one of the things I always try to do, and our court's great about in Thompson County, is up that visitation. Like give them as much FaceTime every day if they can, or give them more visitation. If we can get them with the relative can supervise the visitation. Because I always say, they're not going to shoot up at their grandma's house while the kids were there, but they may have an hour or two where they get to hug each other and watch something on TV, and that's so important, I think.
It is important.
As long as somebody has a protective capacity in that home, we can let them be around that parent. So, yeah.
I agree.
Very interesting.
It is.
I'm sorry to be a Debbie Downer.
No.
Okay.
But it kind of brings us full circle to the judges love a comeback story. And so as a parent or as a person struggling with addiction, the cliche is one day at a time, but literally one day at a time. Get through today. Let today be a good day. Be a good parent or a good human or whatever it is. Worry about tomorrow. And, the judges, it's almost better to have messed up and come back than not even to have messed up sometimes. Because they will give you an opportunity if you earn it.
Right. And the thing is, a lot of times people just want a chance. A lot of times when I'm assigned to a case, the first thing I'll ask that parent is, what can I do to help you get to wherever we need to be? Like just tell me what you need, and I'll make sure that happens, or we'll make sure that you get the help that you need. And, a lot of times you find that it's cyclical in nature, like they were a child in the system too. Their parents had their children removed. Like you find that a lot in the youth court system, because poverty is generational a lot of times. And so, everybody's always like, oh, why can't they just pick themselves up by their bootstraps? And I'm like, well, it's real hard if you don't have boots. You've never had them. So that's what we find a lot in Mississippi, is this generational drug use, alcohol use, whatever. And they do need help. And a lot of times, if you give them the chance and the resource, there's lots of success stories. Because people really do want to do better.
Well, people do want to do better. And a common thread that I've seen with most people in recovery is, at the beginning, you don't have any hope. Like, you really don't see how your life is ever going to be any better or different. And when you can't even see, I mean, it's not light at the end of the tunnel. When you just don't believe there is light,
Right.
what's the point?
When all options are bad.
Yeah.
And everything, leads to either loss of job, loss of family, loss of freedom, you don't see a path forward. I mean, that's something that Chad and I deal with in our practice on occasion, especially with professionals with addiction issues, because their identity is their profession. And if they're not that profession anymore, then they're not who they want people to think they are. They don't get to live that Facebook life that nobody really lives, but we pretend to.
Right.
Yeah, where they're cooking stuff. Well, the other thing is like you said earlier, like when you were in that house or whatever, like you didn't realize how bad it was because you didn't realize it was a dump or what. Like when you're actively in addiction, it may not seem that bad, like where you're at in life versus what other people are looking at, going, "Oh my God, you've gone off the deep end," or you don't realize you're sort of in that fog, I
mean, it was a nice house.
Right.
It was a nice house, but I look back on it and I think, I mean,
it was a prison.
I don't even like to drive by that neighborhood.
Yeah.
I was a prisoner of my own poor choices, and just couldn't seem to find. I mean, I call it my off-ramp theory of recovery. I mean, I had plenty of off-ramps, right? I could have gotten off that highway of shenanigans 1,000 times and didn't.
Right.
And doubled down on my misery and, desperation and consequences can be a motivator, and
It takes what it takes.
it doesn't take.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But you don't know what that is until you
Right.
get there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the frustrating thing, especially for us when we're trying to help somebody. You know, I don't know what it takes sometimes. I mean, how far or how bad does it have to get? Nobody can answer that. That's an individual.
Right. I look at it as, no matter how bad things get, the worse things get, and you can make it through that, then you'll then be able to use that information that you learned going through that experience to help other people. So that's how I look at it.
That's part of the philosophical background.
There's always a
Recovery
silver lining.
I mean, between the two of us, we've certainly made every poor choice that has ever been.
Twice.
And if I can help one person,
Right.
maybe not make one bad choice that I made, it would be worth it.
Right.
The more people that talk about being in recovery, I think the better.
Right.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
She,
Is there a safe amount? Say your substance is one thing, pills or whatever. Can you have alcohol?
So my official position on this is absolutely not. Cross addiction is a real thing. And once we develop that desire to avoid how we feel, and we seek out sex, gambling, substances to change how we feel, we are going to continue seeking things that change how we feel. And so, I mean, the stories are legion about people that got sober and gambled too much, and people that got sober and were promiscuous. I mean, look, if you're an adult, do what you want to do. I mean,
But they just swap addictions. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying? Like the focus becomes,
called
but
that.
it's a new high.
Right.
But it's a high doing this.
Alcohol was never my thing.
Right.
I don't like the taste of it. Period. I think it's disgusting. But every time that I relapsed and would put alcohol into my body, it would set off the phenomenon of craving. And from that point, I have no more control over what I do as far as
Wow.
substance is concerned. So eventually, I'm going to go back to what I love.
Yeah.
The alcohol is going to be the Kickstarter to get me going again.
It was
And
the gateway drug.
well, I love
For me.
Pinot Noir and really good cheddar cheese. I think it is from heaven, right? It's delicious. And I don't have it, even though I never missed work. I never, didn't
Right.
pay my child support. I never did this, whatever, because of Pinot Noir. But when I drink it, I'm going to increase the likelihood that I find something to shoot up. And that's just all there is to it. And it's too much of a risk.
Sure.
That plus cross addiction is real, and I could find myself, like Otis from Mayberry. I love marijuana, and I avoid it for the same reason.
I'm the same way. Marijuana was always integral in my life. I mean, I loved it. It was my best friend. It was there when things were great.
The
and it was there,
gentleman
and it was there when things were bad. And it was difficult for me to give that up. But I had to realize that I am not one of those individuals that can smoke marijuana like a gentleman. I'm just not.
Right.
I will go back to other things.
I mean, look, I ate
Despite my
I ate
best
bacon,
effort.
bacon for breakfast, cooked in a cast iron skillet every morning for 5 or 6, 7 years, so that my wife at the time couldn't smell the marijuana I was smoking at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
I mean, people that have that addictive thing, I've got that addictive thing. And
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if 1 is good, 10 is
Fabulous.
the best.
Yeah, exactly.
My friend Billy used to say, if they make a cure for alcoholism, he'd shoot it up.
Yeah. So it's always like sort of that slippery slope. Like,
It is a slippery
right,
slope.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I've got that thing. Is it a disease? Is it a constellation of poor behaviors? I don't care. We'll go with the disease.
The solution is the
That's what-
same,
Right.
no matter what.
I've got it. No doubt about it. I can't pretend that I don't.
Right. I remember I used to not really, I had a very poor attitude about AA, like when some of my friends were in it years and years ago, and it's probably just because I didn't really understand. But I was always like, you don't ever get healed. Like you're never done. You're always like one drink away from losing everything. And I thought you just live on that edge. But like growing and growing up and being around people that have gone through it. Now I know why, because it is always that slippery slope. So you do live that creed of, I'm doing great today, but one drink or one whatever could totally screw all of this up.
Yeah, there's a part of the big book of AA that talks about, there's a famous line. It's talking about what you're like a man that's lost his legs, he can never grow new ones. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet.
Right.
And so the idea being, look, this is just the way it is. You've got this problem. Yeah. You've got this addictive personality, or your dopamine receptors aren't. Right. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah.
Like porn, I can't define it, but I know
when you see it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting. Because it is sort of, I get it. Like, that's why you would never. Yeah. You could probably have a glass of wine, but no risk.
I know that I could go home tonight and have a glass of wine and eat that sharp cheddar cheese, and I would wake up tomorrow and everything would be fine. Except for the fact that I felt guilty.
Right, sure.
Ashamed of myself.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have those life problems that we associate with addiction. But
immediately,
I've lit a fuse.
Correct.
I've lit a fuse. Because what happens inevitably is your wife comes home and she's no good.
Right.
Your kids just won't do right. I'm tired of telling you, your boss is on your ass about something, but you have some life problem and you find yourself unable to deal with it in a healthy fashion. And I promise you would be amazed at the ways you're gonna meet somebody that does drugs. Right. And you're gonna meet that person at just the wrong time.
Right.
And it's off to the races. Yeah. So, complete abstinence is what we promote. What other questions you have?
I was going to say, go ahead.
Well, it kind of answered the follow-up to that was, is there any safe amount? But we've answered that one too.
Not for me.
Well, look, I heard a story one time. This guy was talking about how he quit smoking. Mm-hmm. And he said, I hadn't smoked a cigarette in 25 years. And he said, I got through eating Thanksgiving dinner, pushed my plate away, scooted my seat back, and tapped my shirt to get that pack of cigarettes on the lighter. He said, I hadn't smoked a cigarette in 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And so there's that thing that's always there. There are stories. So the way the AA Big Book is divided, there's 164 pages of basic text, and then there are stories in the back. And one of the stories is about, or it might even be in the regular part of the book, the guy that stays sober for 25 or 30 years, and he starts drinking again, and then he's dead in 6 or 9 months, whatever. So, maybe out in Malibu, they've got, what is that? Those commercials, Malibu, whatever.
What if it's prescribed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're getting close to our. Do you need to go?
I don't.
Oh, yeah. I meant to ask how long we're.
Well, this is good to me. So,
okay.
We had. I want everybody to know that Chad has another job. Are you okay to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Where he's the COO of marijuana dispensary.
And we're vertically integrated. So we're cultivators, we process, and we'll have dispensaries throughout the state. Yeah.
Chad Escobar is
yes. Yeah.
So we had some, when I bumped into Chad Matthew in Crab Shack, which if you want to have some black and grouper, it's really good there. And so I had nagged the shit out of them about being on the podcast, and I guess they felt like they finally couldn't get away from it. And they agreed to be on it, and Chad said, well, can I talk about marijuana? And then I said no, and I thought, is Chad going to be mad at me?
No.
I said no. Then Daniel and I were talking about it, and Daniel brought up the good point of, are we going to be free speech advocates around here or not? This isn't a Hunter Biden laptop. Which if you're on Twitter...
Hold on, we got to do the rim shot there.
So this is good. Last 2 episodes ago, or maybe 3, was Bodie McDonald.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
The prosecutor.
Prosecutors, yeah.
And so I was hitting him with, how are y'all going to do this? What are you...
Right.
How, what's going to happen? So, Chad, tell us about Tell us about your endeavor here.
Yeah, so I'll take it. It stemmed from representing parents that had lost their children because they tested positive for marijuana. That's how I got into it. But the other thing is I had some friends that had family members that had cancer or Parkinson's or whatever, and it just seemed ridiculous to me that we were not within the other 37 states that have this availability for patients that need it. But the other thing is, but for this geographical boundary, there was an alternative medicine out there that people could use. You know, I got to speak to like the Sheriff's Association about it. You know, I thought I was going to get like arrested because, you know, like here I am coming into a room with all these, you know, deputies. Oh yeah. What's he doing in here? But anyway, honestly, that's what it was about for me. I thought to myself, this is crazy because there are really amazing people that I know in my life that have these family members that they're literally driving downtown Jackson and buying whatever they can off the street because this is better than the pain medicine that their family members on, because now they have an appetite. Now, you know, everything that, you know, they'll write you a script and feed you 100 pills if you're terminal. But it messes with the rest of your body. And I just thought, this is ridiculous that Mississippi can't also have that. And we should. And the difference is now I know what you're putting in your body because I grew it.
Right.
And it's been tested. And I can say, yeah, if your family member meets this condition and wants to try this, try it.
Especially with the way
That's
things
right.
are now with fentanyl. I mean, there's
Correct.
marijuana that's being laced with fentanyl.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we had a ton of kids in Hinds County at one point several years ago that were admitted to the hospital for spice. And I mean, I'm talking horrific things.
Spice is bad.
Oh, it's horrible. And I just thought to myself, this is so, a lot of it is sort of changing that narrative of like, did we bring marijuana to Mississippi? Of course not. It's been here for decades and decades and decades. But what we can bring is a safe way for people to mitigate their suffering if they meet the requirement.
Sure.
And so that's what it's about for me, is being able to provide that.
I support it. I think it's
Yeah.
a good thing. I really do.
I do too. I think it'll help a lot of people that really need it. And so yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
That's awesome.
But here's the other thing that I always tell people. We didn't change any laws regarding DUI or anything else. So you still can't go like smoke up and drive a car or smoke up and drive your boat. Like none of that changed. The only thing that changed is there's a possession limit now because you're only allowed a certain amount. You're allowed 6 MMCEUs, which is the equivalency unit for the state. So that's all you're allowed. And so you can't ever have more than 28 MMCEUs on your person at any time. So yeah.
Realistically, how much is 28 MMC?
So
how many grams?
Okay, so 1 MMCEU, and you can only get 6 a week. So that's your limit. You have to, you can't sell more than 6. So 1 MMCEU is equivalent to either 3.5 grams of flour. So if you have a little pre-roll, like a half gram pre-roll, so that would be 7 of those a week, and they're little. Or you could choose whatever you want. You can make up that 6 MMCEUs so you can get some edibles, you can get a vape cartridge, whatever you want. But every package that's done through a licensed dispensary has to have the equivalency unit on the packaging.
Sure.
And we're also, everybody's linked in with the same metric system, which is seed to sell. And so I'm also with prescription monitoring program. So if you came into my dispensary and you'd already gone and gotten 3, it's going to tell me you only have 3 left for this week.
Wow.
So I can't sell you more than that. So it's all very regulated.
I love how the 3.5 gram system of measurement has made it to somewhere so official.
Right.
Everybody else, that is an 8 ball.
Yeah.
And that was strictly the legislators that came up with that. I mean, like you know,
Because they did
Makes you
college.
wonder.
right. So after the initiative
got it
process
from
failed, yeah,
They know the time to do
yeah. But
I
yeah,
think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing.
I
to
think
do.
it will be too. I think it'll help a lot of people that need it, that can try this. And,
So it's solely for the benefit of my mother and aunt who listen. 28 grams is an ounce, and 1/8 of an ounce is 3.5 grams, or an 8 ball.
yeah,
You're welcome, Mama.
yeah. I know we get the metric system at one day.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
we're excited. It's gonna be a good thing, I think.
It's awesome.
And there's a lot of people in the industry. And this is a unique opportunity for Mississippi, period. Because the whole industry is right here.
This is, I mean,
Right.
it's going to create jobs. I mean, there's
Oh, absolutely.
because you have
And
to,
a lot of
you have to
times-
Tax income.
every
Everything's
bit
here.
you sell has to be grown within this.
Absolutely.
state.
Yeah, we can't ship out, we can't ship in, federally illegal. And the whole industry, from transporters to disposal entities to dispensaries to cultivators, processors, testing facilities, everything has to be within the state of Mississippi.
I saw your
And so that's
facility on
amazing.
WLBT.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful,
right.
beautiful
Thank
setup.
you.
Yeah.
We're really proud of it, and it was important for us to, because we've done a lot of work in Hinds County too. We wanted to stay in Jackson and provide some really, really good job opportunities, and we have a lot of job opportunities.
One of the questions on the July bar exam was, the tester, the person taking the test, is a new associate at the law firm, and Old Man Johnson, the partner, has a client who wants to open a marijuana dispensary, and you're given this information, and you determine that you have an ethical problem, that the sale of marijuana is a federal crime, and you're worried about advising a client as to how to break the law. So once I got over my irritation about having to answer a question that hadn't been asked in the past 15 years, and thus I did not know the right answer to it. What about the banking problem? Like, I mean, I'm not boned up on this. I know
Right.
at one point in time, like all of the California or Colorado dispensaries were having to maintain like vast quantities of cash.
Right.
Because no bank would let them deposit.
Yeah.
Is it cash only here?
No, so we have state chartered banks. So the only problem was FDIC because they're federally insured. So we have state chartered banks that are here in Mississippi that have opened up a cannabis branch, which is wonderful for the state chartered banks. So we do have that, and then there's also just some nationwide bankers that are just cannabis related. So yeah. Now I think once it's deregulated federally, in a couple of years, because it'll take a while to write the regulation, that FDIC stuff will change. But for right now, we're happy to use a state charter bank. That's great.
Sure.
Keep it in Mississippi. I mean, I think that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What about, can you use your debit card?
So there are certain debit cards or credit cards you can use, and it's one of those. There's also third-party apps. There's like one called Canapay or something that you can use.
Put those on your phone.
Yeah, you have to blow into it. But there's it's interesting because it's like sort of like when you go to a store and you swipe and they're like Visa debit or Visa whatever. You have to make the decision. And you're like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
You can use sort of different programs to do it that way.
Cool.
So and we have ATMs in the dispensaries too.
Right.
Yeah.
About Bitcoin.
But look, that's been a huge topic
I
about
bet it has.
Bitcoin payments for cannabis related. Yeah, that's been a really big topic. I thought so. Of course, I don't really understand a lot of that, but
Look, I can tell you this. I wish I had kept the few Bitcoin I had from back in the day. Didn't use it for
Things.
illicit
right.
purposes.
Sounds like
That's
sounds like you used it for shenanigans.
Yeah.
It funded some shenanigans.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wow. Yeah, but to answer your question, tons of new jobs, and they're really well-paying jobs. So, right in line with Amazon, and like this has the potential to change a lot. Starting at $15, $16 an hour versus minimum wage.
Right.
And so this is it's a great opportunity for Mississippi if it's done correctly,
Well,
and I think it will be.
I wish you the best of luck. I
Thank
think
you.
that's awesome.
Thank you.
So Chad's a rock star. He's
That's
good
awesome.
at everything.
Oh,
This
He
is true.
is.
thank you.
I was telling Daniel, I was like, he's a wonderkind. When I first met him, he was, like 21 or 2.
Wow.
It was last year. Yeah.
Well, I know we've been going for a while, and y'all might be, your battery running out. Is there anything y'all want to talk about, like on the divorce side of things? Any observations you've made? I know one thing as a practicing attorney, you have to kind of be a observer of human nature, the human condition.
Right.
Any observations y'all have made being, these expert practitioners?
Matthew, talk about how, like, so we do have, for grounds for divorce, we do have habitual drunkenness and habitual drug use, but talk about how that parlays really into a lot of cruelty, too. So it's sort of interrelated.
We have some archaic divorce laws, if you can believe that.
Habitual opium.
Yeah, right.
Habitual
That's what-
morphine.
Right, yes. Or like.
Habitual drug use of opium and other like drugs, which there's one case where it dumps marijuana into that category, a reported case.
Right, yeah.
Pothead.
And we have habitual drunkenness, which is kind of an interesting ground because it has to exist at the time of, is it separation or the trial? I forget. It's worded some certain way. I've learned that I can't memorize all of the statutes, but if I know they exist, I can go read it again and look at it. But then we have this umbrella. So, but you need the umbrella because we're one of two states. This is going to be a whole other hour, so we're going to have to come back.
Okay.
And then you're going to have Chad back to talk about Kelly's Green and everything they're doing because that's another hour in and of itself. But we don't have true no fault divorce in Mississippi. We have irreconcilable differences, and everybody assumes it's no fault, but it's really not. And the distinction and the difference is in Mississippi you have to have an agreement to everything: the divorce itself, and then all the terms, custody and support, and how do we divide property and everything. And if you don't agree for any reason, because I don't want a divorce or because you're not getting that green couch, you can't get a divorce in Mississippi.
Unless you can prove that the other party has committed one of the 13 or so
That's exactly right.
failures. Adultery is the one everybody knows about. Habitual cruel and inhuman treatment is where they make your life intolerable and it has some impact on your
Health and safety.
And
it's also the hardest ground to prove.
The judges just don't give those out. I mean, under
Right.
the habitual cruelty standard, it has to be habitual, which means constant. So it's not we got into a fight this weekend. It's that we're constantly in arguments and fights, and it's not mere rudeness or unkindness.
Or being a smart ass.
That's not grounds. It's just not.
insufficient.
Right.
So it has to be this extreme conduct.
And somebody has to witness. You have to have a corroborating witness.
Right. So there's yes,
So
but
if he's just an
Unless
asshole,
the
then I don't.
yes, but there's some confusion around that. So a couple of years ago,
Clear it up for us.
it's not clear now. The legislature didn't add a new ground, but they allowed for in domestic violence, domestic abuse situations, that one witness could be sufficient to corroborate the victim. I mean, the victim testifying, if the judge believes you, is enough.
Like a medical healthcare provider, or
No, the victim.
The victim.
Oh, the victim.
You,
That was corroboration enough for domestic violence.
If the judge believes you, that is sufficient for the judge to grant
Right.
you a divorce.
Okay.
Prior to this change, you did have to have the medical provider or medical records or a neighbor or your mom or somebody to come in and say they observed it or they observed you immediately after, and the pain and the suffering and all of that. And so we have some judges that now see the corroboration standard as, if I believe you, Drew Hassan, then that's sufficient. And then we have some judges who say, well, it's only if it's domestic abuse. If it's not domestic abuse, then you still got to have your proof come in here from Daniel to say the impact it's had on you and what I've observed and all of that. And so depending on what county you're in, depending on who your chancellor is, you have this changing standard.
And this is why it's important to have an attorney like Matthew or Chad, somebody that is well versed in these things, experienced, because there is a lot of difference between like things in Rankin County that will get you in a lot of trouble are not a big deal in Hines County.
Well, right.
And there's
and it's because the judges are, just individuals that, were, so there's so much discretion, chancellor discretion in domestic relations cases. I mean, they just have broad discretion, and there's no jury, so they get to determine the veracity of the witness or the weight of whatever, even though there are guidelines and factors that they're supposed to acknowledge and sort of follow. They get to put whatever weight on it, or they get to say, well, I believe them, I don't,
And then when you go to I have long since held the belief that if you want to know who has the most power and who can affect your everyday life, I mean, is the chancellor. I mean,
Right.
can come into your life and change things that is unbelievable, and with the quickness. I guess a lot like youth court.
Yeah.
You know, a circuit court judge may be able to put you in prison for a long time, but the chancellor can take your kids from you.
There's a story a chancellor tells that he had a litigant in his courtroom and he was ordering this man to pay for his kid's college. And he said, "Nobody paid for my college, Your Honor. I don't want to pay for my kid's college." Now, it's a privilege, not a right sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if when the time, and it was early, it wasn't college time. If and when the time comes, and if and when he has the grades and I have the ability, then that may be something I choose to do, but I don't want to be made to do it. And the judge said, "Don't get a divorce.
Right.
Dismiss your case. You go forward with your case, you're giving me the power to determine whether or not you pay for college."
And look, if you're aggrieved with the chancellor's decision and you appeal it, the standard to overturn it is a pretty high bar. I mean, abuse of discretion.
Right.
They're not just handing out.
It's not that they would have decided it differently on the same set of facts.
The Supreme Court or Court of Appeals could have the mindset of, we wouldn't have done that, but the judge just simply didn't abuse his discretion to do that. And it's a tough bar.
It is. But I will say what Matthew was just talking about, I get that chancellor's point, because we don't make married couples be obligated for their children's college. We don't go to every couple and go, "Oh, now you're married, so he's got to pay half," or whatever. But certainly that's something that comes up in a lot of divorces. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's just really interesting the difference. But you're right, discretion, as long as that chancellor has put in the ruling or in the judgment enough foundation to find how they got there, that they considered this, or they, and they determined that this witness was credible or this witness was not credible.
We've had a few where at the end the judge has talked about the credibility of the witnesses, and it has felt like he's doing it to protect an appeal.
Right.
Like, I observed this witness, I found them to be credible, or I found them not to be credible, and that's what I based my ruling on, and it just guts an appeal. When you have this abuse of discretion standard, because on the black and white transcript, you read it, it's dry. There's no tone and body language, but this judge said, "I saw the witness and he was snarling and flippant," and none of that stuff happened, by the way, but that's what the judge said.
And tell them what happened. So, like, if you win your appeal, it's gonna.
You get to go back. You get to go back to that same judge.
This is where they really get you. So you win, and you're elated, and the client and the attorney be high five, and they say, "What happens next?" Well, we go back to the same judge for a do-over, and the Court of Appeals has said, "Now, Judge, you need to reconsider this, or you need to look at that." And oftentimes, a win is not a win.
Right.
It's a Pyrrhic victory.
Oh, right. Yeah. And it takes forever. So that's the other thing. Your appeal can take 2 years before you get a decision, which is, but we've got to, and they rarely grant oral argument, but Matthew's actually had several recently. We've got one next
Thursday,
week. Yeah. On a case. So maybe the tide's turning a little for that. Yeah. So a lot of what my point, what I was trying to get at, is a lot of times, like, alcohol or drug use or whatever also sort of comes in a little bit under this umbrella for cruelty or whatever. They'll bring that up, and then also it kind of falls under the custody Albright factors umbrella of, like, health,
moral fitness,
and then the physical health, the mental health of the parents, and all of that stuff. So it's sort of all kind of falls in line with that.
And it's funny because it's not a problem until it is, but it becomes a problem when you're going through a divorce or custody case.
Sure.
And we had one where the guy didn't drink and she drank, recreationally. And I don't think it was inappropriately. He thought it was inappropriately, but what he would do was he would buy alcohol and keep it in the house.
Right.
To set her up. He thought it was a problem, But he continued to invest in the problem.
And then weaponize that fact.
Oh,
in
yes.
divorce.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She's a lush.
That's right.
Yep.
Look at all this liquor I bought. It's just crazy. But yeah, and we are the only it's one of us. We are in one other state, South Dakota,
That's right.
that do not have a true no fault. So once again, we're in the minority.
And that's-
and what
That's been brought up in the legislature every
Sure.
year for the last 20
right?
to add a true no-fault divorce statute, and it has died
Yeah.
miserably every time. Last year, it was the closest ever.
Correct. Yeah.
They appointed a blue ribbon panel. Debbie Bell.
Blue ribbon.
Debbie Bell.
Ribbon.
Debbie Bell is a law professor, and she wrote a book about family law, and it's literally on every judge's desk.
Hoity-toity lawyers, uppity
Chancellors.
chancellors and appellate court judges, and they
Right.
all recommended out of this committee that it be adopted, and it was a done deal until it wasn't.
Right. And so what true no fault means is that one party can go in and say, this marriage is irretrievably broken down. Or one party can go in and say, I want out, as opposed to in our state with irreconcilable differences, you both have to go in.
Do you think it was defeated because we're in the Bible Belt?
Yes.
And
The rumor is whoever the chair of the committee was had some designs on higher public office and didn't want to be seen as weak on families.
Right. Yeah. I know.
Jesus doesn't like divorce.
He never married.
That is true.
That's one way to never have to get a divorce. Don't get married.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I think there was a push for that because, we're just so archaic in that sense, as opposed to other states. And then there's also a push to lower our child support age. So we're 21, which most states are 18. And so,
What
but
do y'all
it
think about
died.
that?
It died.
Are y'all in support of that?
So we're in support of the change. Most states are 18 or 19 if the child's still in high school, but the rates are higher. And so we have the oldest age and the lowest rates in the country. And it goes until 21, where most people just assume, even though we've been doing this for however long we've been doing it, they still assume their child's an adult at 18.
Right.
They're not in Mississippi law.
No. And,
When it comes to family law,
right.
an 18-year-old that commits a crime is going to.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. That's different.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so, but what I found recently, because I've had several cases come up, is when you're a child that's in foster care, they age you out at 19. So you're still technically a minor, but you're on your own.
Literally.
Like that's it. You're not in foster care anymore. You're done.
So
you age
A
out.
child aging out of foster care means their parents' rights have been terminated. So they don't have parents, and they haven't been adopted.
Right.
And they're 19, and they say, "Good luck."
Bye. That's I've had 2 girls recently, like that is their status. Like they don't have a parent or guardian. They're still a minor for a lot of reasons. It's just, it's so crazy. Like maybe things should be more in line, but it's us. And is it one other state that's an obligor? Are we the only one? But most states, when it comes to child support, are an income shared model. So that means we look at both parents' income and come up with something that works, as opposed to an obligor method, which means we just look at the non-custodial parent's income. And we say, okay, based on your income and how many children you have, we're going to take this much of your adjusted gross income. So,
And then there's the Delaware model.
Where's that one?
Guess which state uses that one?
South Dakota.
Hawaii. And Delaware.
So, yeah.
Child gets paid first,
Yeah.
regardless of
And then they look at the bills of everybody else.
parents' income.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
Yeah. It's really interesting. But there are a lot of people, even to this day, that will come in that maybe want to modify something or maybe stop paying child support when the child turns 18. And you're like, no. It goes until 21. Like that's the age of majority. Because some of the agreements will just say until the child reaches the age of majority. Don't actually say 21, and so they think in their head, oh, well, this child can enlist in the army, this child is 18, they can commit a crime, they can whatever. So we're done. And
You're not.
It's not. And it cannot be forgiven. So child support vests when it's due, and it can become a judgment that a child can collect on until they're 28.
This is kind of crazy. So let's say that you're the dad, you got to pay child support, and you've been a pilot for FedEx. Like I've just picked a high-paying job, and then you lose your job, and you're on the hook. You're on the hook for whatever that amount is that you're on the hook for,
Even though you're not still employed.
even though you're not employed.
Until you get it changed, you're on the hook.
You can even file a petition for modification. Like you've officially asked the court to recognize your job loss and to downwardly modify your child support. And until you have that trial, and the judge signs the order, you're all those months. And believe me, this is a strategy employed by many a woman or man who's, I'm gonna kick the can down the road.
Right, yeah.
Oh, and motion for continuance, Your Honor. I've got
Uh-huh.
BB counting seminar.
Correct.
That we can. COVID. Oh, I bet COVID messed everybody up.
It messed a lot, yeah.
So you can get your child support reduced, but now you're still on the hook for every month that at that higher rate.
Right, and the court does not accept out-of-court agreements because you can't agree to forgive something. So even if you and your ex-spouse or whatever get along great, she's like, don't worry about paying the child support this month. I'm good, whatever. That has no effect
She can
on the
tell
fact
you,
that you still owe it.
She can tell you, don't worry about it, and then still sue you for that.
Oh, right, yeah.
And get it.
And get it, right, yeah. And maybe get attorney's fees for bringing the contempt. So, so it's it matters a lot, and lots of people that get along, will do something like that, or they'll say, let this child's now 14, he wants to come live with you. Don't worry about paying him child support, whatever. And they never go back to court. They just sort of rock along, and then the child's now 16, and he and his dad are fighting. So now that he's going back to mom, that mom can file something and say, well, where's my child support for the last 2 years?
Oh my God.
We did, the order says this, and it happens. It happens a lot. So
It's not a problem until it is.
right, exactly. So, yeah.
All right,
What else?
so I think we've identified another hour for fault grounds, another hour for child support, another hour for Chad's Escobar King medical marijuana in Mississippi. Is there what other topics do we need to address?
Look, we can go on.
No. I'm not talking about right now. I'm talking about in the future to solve the world's problems.
Well, it's just there aren't enough opportunities
Right.
for people to hear interviews with practicing attorneys. There's really not. The same could be said for doctors. I mean, to where you can, because if you go to the doctor, you're going to get 7 minutes
Right.
at the most.
Right.
And you don't get a chance to listen to them and find out where the real problems are or where the real resources for help are. So,
Yeah, no, that's true.
y'all, I am forever indebted to you for taking the time to come on here.
Yes,
I know
thank you.
people are going to have appreciated hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
But we're happy to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you
proud
for
to be
inviting
here.
us.
This was fun.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, y'all. Thank you. Recovery Lab 15. Buy a hoodie.
Yes.
Hashtag hoodies.
All right.
They are
In the
spectacular
hood.
hoodies.
I saw it on Facebook.
But you didn't order one, so
No,
you
I
must not have
haven't.
been moved enough.
I will though.
There we go.
Did you create a,
I did make a folder.
okay.
As soon as he turns off that recording thing, I've got some other questions I'm going to ask.
Oh, is it still recording?
It's still recording.
Yeah, hang on.
We're still live.
I don't know what to do.